All right. I'm just going to say welcome to all of you. And I see a few of your faces on your screens. And my goal is to present my talk in 30 minutes and then open it up for 10 minutes of discussion and questions from you. So I'm going to move right into my talk. Okay. So I'm going to share the results of work that I did that was published in a paper that came out in late 2020. And I haven't shared this with NAAWE before, but I also updated it. I did a lit review from the middle of 2020 when I cut off before until right now, October 2021, kind of looked at the literature again. And so I've integrated new pieces that have come out as I go through this as well. And where this work comes from is that I was invited to be part of a group of people from across the country who were asked to evaluate different measures for assessing connection to nature. And that was a successful project. You can see right there in the cover to the final guide, different sponsors that it had, and Gabby Salazar, Christine Kunkel, Martha Monroe, who were the main authors. And this is a free download on the NAAWE website. It covers different measures and ways of evaluating connection to nature for all ages. But I decided to dive into the work on connection with nature with children, meaning preschoolers through high school students with a focus on that. Tom Beery, who's in Sweden, and I actually got together an advisory team of 9 people who work on measuring nature connection with really young children, 2 to 5-year-olds. And we made sure that there are measures appropriate to that age that are in this practitioner guide as well. And I realized nobody has reviewed all the research on childhood nature connection before. So I dove in and I did that. And that was this article that was published in late 2020. And as I was reading it, I was struck by the emphasis on connecting to nature always being a positive experience, which is overwhelmingly what that literature presents. Because at the same time, since like the 1990s, I had been reading studies that showed that when children feel connected to nature, they can actually feel a lot of alarm and distress. And of course, in the 1990s, the problems of a changing planet were less acute than they are now, but already the studies that looked at this and asked open-ended questions like, what do you think the world will be like in 50 years? Or do you have any environmental concerns? Showed that feeling part of nature and connected with nature can be very difficult sometimes. So how do we put this research together? And that's what my talk is going to be about today. First of all, what does connection to nature in childhood mean? And how you measure it is effectively what it means. And when you look at all the different ways of measuring qualitative as well as quantitative, you see that they pretty much all include these components. It means having positive experiences in nature, feeling emotional affiliation and attraction to nature. On the cognitive side, feeling curiosity about nature, wanting to explore it, understanding human nature, interdependence, and feeling motivated to protect it. So that's what it means in the research literature. And why is it important? Well, it's important because, and there's quite a lot of research on this, when kids express a greater sense of connection to nature, they also have these benefits, and there are many studies to this effect, which are reviewed in that paper. They're more likely to exhibit prosocial behavior. Older teens are more likely to show positive youth development, creative thinking on measures of creative thinking. They're more likely to self-report good health and subjective well-being and fewer psychological complaints. So feeling connected to nature is evidently good for children, has benefits for them. Well, the literature also shows it has benefits for the natural world. Feeling more connected to nature, again, many studies that show this. Kids who express that are more likely to say they want to conserve nature. They show greater environmental knowledge. They're doing things to protect the natural world, including environmental citizenship behaviors like talking about environmental issues with friends and family, writing letters, as Dr. King, if you just saw that inspiring plenary talk, was recommending to decision makers. So it's good for children and it's good for the natural world, for a larger environment. We, on the other side, that other literature, and there's almost no cross-referencing between these literatures, the other literature that asks general questions, like in this case, do you have any environmental concerns? This is a study, doctoral student of mine, Susie Strife, conducted, which had many parts, but including interviews with 50, 10 to 11-year-olds in both the high-end community and a very environmental injustice, very polluted community, mostly disadvantaged families. And it didn't matter, on either side, the large majority expressed emotions of sadness, fear, and anger when they talked about their environmental concerns. And you can see some of the things they said, and this was quite representative. Yeah, to me, when I was looking at her data with Susie, I mean, it was very hard to take. Seeing that kids are going around carrying these feelings. Here's a more recent paper that just came out in the past year, very similar. So this was 49 11 to 12-year-olds in urban and rural locations in England and India, and who were asked about their environmental concerns. So here we are 12 years later, and similar results. For example, this boy in Hyderabad, he's very conscious of the pollution, largely from vehicle emissions in his city. He knows the air, it's not fresh anymore, but he says he's gotten used to that. But then he says, but to breathe in, take the air, this might be a problem in the future, right? So this gives me goosebumps for what will happen in the future. And in the same study, here's a girl in an English village feeling that sense of the planet changing, the natural world changing, that the children in the future won't see the beauty that she sees, but then thinking that there's probably a lot of beauty that was in that area in the past that is no longer there for her to experience. Or Ben in rural England thinking that all the plants are going to be dead in 30 years. And he says, yeah, that's really scary, but I can't do anything about it at the moment. So that feeling of, disempowerment as well. That last study I just showed you was done in May 2019, before the climate strikes. Maybe it would be different now, but this was the climate strike in Denver, Colorado, where young people are finding ways to have a voice and try to make a difference. But still, as one of the girls presenting there said, it is like a dark cloud in the background all the time, and try not to think about it. And for many children, it's not just what they hear about in the news, it's part of their lives. And these are photos from my county, our big flood in 2013. We had very intense, fast-moving fires like California does, especially in the summer and fall of 2020. So kids in our county, these are direct experience for many, and that's more and more the case around the world. Okay, so what struck me in reading these two different literatures was that if you look at the blue band at the bottom, um, that represents what kids are expressing when they're expressing connection to nature, and the green. And you look at what kids are expressing when they're talking about their feelings of environmental fear and loss. That's the yellow and the green. In other words, I was hearing in these two separate literatures, I was hearing over and over again, kids saying the same things. So there was this big area of overlap. So they're separate research literatures, but you think of a kid as one organism. And in fact, there's a lot of overlap in these feelings. If you feel empathy with other living things and understand human nature and interdependence and want to protect nature and feel emotionally affiliated with it, that's going to be part of why you're feeling those environmental fear and loss. They're really connected. So how do we help young people cope with climate change and associated problems like species loss? I think it's really important for us to think about this, because when kids come into a classroom or they come into a nature program, there is a big emphasis, as there should be, on giving them experiences of nature connection. And that is important. And we saw reasons why that's so important. We need to be doing that. But as I said, a kid is one organism that can hold both sides of these emotions. And I think we really need to be alert to that and be prepared to help with the coping side as well as the connecting side. So in the basic research of psychology, there are three forms of coping that are referenced very, very commonly, especially the top two, but the third, meaning focused, is newer, but is important as well. So emotion focused coping. People seek to soothe or escape their painful feelings. And I think we're very familiar in our society with a lot of the ways of trying to escape painful feelings around our changing planet: denial, de-emphasizing the threat, distracting ourselves with something else, distancing what might happen to other people. It's not going to ever happen to me and my friends and my family. And emphasizing the hopelessness even. Because if you really just decide, oh, it's all hopeless, then you can walk away from it and feel, well, then I don't need to think about it. There's nothing I can do. So it's kind of another form of distancing, actually, it can be. And then there are positive ways of self-care, of the ways we all need to take care of ourselves when we have difficult emotions. And kids would talk about, I go take a walk, or I go get an ice cream, or I talk about it with friends and family. Problem-focused coping is when people seek to solve the problems that cause the difficult feelings, and they can do that either as individuals or in groups. And meaning-focused coping is when people find a positive value, positive meaning in facing the problem and struggling with the problem. And here are some examples of kids, things that kids say here that express meaning-focused coping. The idea that, okay, there's a silver lining because there's greater awareness now and people are more likely to be doing something about it. Maria Ojala is a researcher in Sweden who's done very systematic research on this for years, longer than anyone else, of putting the emotional side together with the climate change and the biodiversity loss side of kids learning. She emphasizes the importance of social trust and how you can see that running through the meaning-focused coping, that idea society's more aware of the problem. People with influence are taking the problem seriously, so I'm not alone with it. And that gives, as she notes, that gives value to the individual actions. The fact that, okay, I may be doing something as an individual, but other people are doing things too. So together we can make a difference. Social trust. And she notes that meaning-focused coping is associated with constructive hope. And different people have named this kind of hope that's allied to action in different ways, but I love this term, constructive hope. And it's a belief in the value of taking action to address problems despite acknowledging the risks and uncertainty. So what are the impact of these different kinds of coping on environmental action? Well, emotion-focused coping, the research shows, is associated with less likelihood that kids are taking action to do anything. Problem-focused coping is associated with taking action. But what Maria Oyala found in a number of studies she's done is that when kids are really worried about climate change, biodiversity loss, changing world, they can be taking action, doing problem-focused coping, and still feel, high levels of anxiety and distress. It's meaning-focused coping she's found that helps buffer kids, and I would say all of us, as we face these difficult issues, and that is associated with a greater likelihood of taking action too. What she found, what Catherine Stevenson has found, also doing this research in this country and others, is that when you ask kids what they're doing, they almost always report individualized actions. And again, the basic psychology of coping is that when a problem is really big and children realize it's bigger than they can handle by themselves, there's the risk of taking action but feeling it's futile at the same time. So how can we help young people develop constructive hope? And I'm referencing here a kind of a version, a condensed version of this talk that was published in Green School's Catalyst Quarterly, written for teachers. And of course, you'll have access to this after when everything's recorded. So one of the most important things is parents, friends, teachers listening to young people's feelings supportively, rather than dismissing their feelings or just being silent about the issue. Because as some people have commented, silence communicates. If you never acknowledge that these big problems are out there in the world, even though kids are very aware of them, that suggests either they're not important or there's nothing we can do, so there's no use talking about them. And kids, Maria Oyala in Sweden says, in Sweden, teenagers, adolescents are always supposed to be cool. And being cool means you're never worried, you're never anxious. So there's a special risk with that age group of finding not just their peers, but teachers too, being dismissive if they try to bring this up. But having a place to share emotions, and that will come up again, is just really important. Learning that others are taking action. We're going to that social trust side now. This is actually a photo from my city, from Boulder. And we have someone in the Department of Theater, Beth Osnes, who does climate change drama, Shine, where each time kids kind of come up with ways to approach the problem, and then they present that to members of the city council. And here you see them, they work with climate scientists, and our city is a center for that. So who have lunch with them, talk with them about what they're doing. So seeing that I'm not alone with it and others are doing things and taking action is really important. And then learning what they can do, and really kind of developing ideas and implementing them themselves. Like here, this is a team from the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo teen program. The teams in the group went to a climate change summit and came back challenged to do something. And one of the ideas they came up with, they developed, they implemented, was planting biodiverse trees that also feed birds and insects on elementary school grounds. And you see one of the teens doing that. And I put here some references also to doing drama with kids and how useful that can be, which you just saw in the previous picture, as well as kind of getting out in the community or in your school and making things happen. Okay, so when people have deliberately taken this psychology of hope and coping and integrated it into curricula, it can make a meaningful difference that's shown by evaluation. So this is the Southeastern Forest and Climate Change curriculum, which was designed by Martha Monroe and others and her colleagues for Project Learning Tree, where she and her colleagues really deliberately integrated the psychology of hope into the curriculum. So kids learning about effective things they could do to protect the forests of their region, learning that others care and others are doing things. So there was a slideshow that was shown in the classroom of inspiring work other people are doing. And also she found learning about forest system resilience, the actual resilience of natural systems. And you can see there from the psychology I was just reviewing, a sense of agency comes from the hope theory of Rick Snyder, and also pathways, thinking about how can I achieve my goals, setting goals and having a sense of pathways to get there. And those pathways can be collective as well as individual. And then social trust, so important, that comes out as so important in Maria Oyala's work, and is recognized by others, including Snyder himself. So, and then what hasn't showed up in other places, and it intrigues me a lot, but Martha Monroe has talked about this, when the kids realize that the forest system has its own inbuilt kind of systems of resilience, that was really helpful for them too. And I think that's a new idea we need to use more. Okay, so Martha reported to me personally that in their Southeastern Forest curriculum, they encouraged teachers to do classroom-wide projects and to really make changes in the school system or get out in their community and do things that would help protect forests. But almost no teachers did that. And I'm completely sympathetic. In fact, what I do, my kind of other job is working with a project I helped create in our city growing up, Boulder, which is all about creating support systems and a sustainable structure for kids to be able to do that, to get out and do environmental projects on their school grounds and their schools and in the community at large. And when young people have these experiences of collective action, they often report strong impact. So for example, there have been evaluations of Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots clubs, which show this, but also here, more recent studies just come out again, one this year, and then another a couple years ago. So the top quotations are from 10 to 12-year-olds in a Boys and Girls Club program who did a 15-week program learning about climate change and then what could they do in their community. Yeah, these are pretty powerful impacts. You can actually do something. They designed a tree planting program for their area, their city, and presented it to the city council, and it was approved and funded. And boy, there's something about it, getting together, creating projects, knowing each other, working together. Where here's another more recent study of Latinx and African American students in urban communities who were involved in environmental projects in the community. And as the young woman says, I learned if people work together, they can accomplish a lot. So this is a complicated figure. It's in that 2020 paper. But what it does is it takes all the recommendations from the literature on connecting kids with nature about, what increases a sense of nature connection, because we know that's good. We want to do that. And all the recommendations from the literature on helping kids cope with our changing planet. And it puts it together in this figure. And once again, so the blue and the green comes from the nature connection literature. The yellow and the green comes from the coping literature. And again, you see there's a significant area where these two literatures are talking about doing the same thing. So we can be simultaneously building connection and coping skills. And I just took all the text out from that figure so you can see it here. Actually that 2020 paper where you'll find this is should be linked to this presentation. But struck me as I look at this is there's been work coming out of Israel by Dorit Carrot and Tammy Ronan and their colleagues, and they have this idea of sustainable well-being and deliberately integrating activities that promote sustainable well-being into the Green Schools movement in Israel. And that's well-being that integrates both individual well-being with the well-being of members of society in the natural world. And when I was reading their paper, which actually just came out, and I discovered it right after mine was already in press, is when you look at this kind of overlap between the recommendations to increase connection with nature and to help kids cope with our changing planet, and you read those are activities for sustainable well-being. I'm almost finished here. So in Israel, Dorit Carrot and her colleagues, they've been deliberately kind of looking for and encouraging on the integration of these kinds of activities into green schools. And when they've evaluated that, and again, they've really deliberately drawn on the hope theory of Rick Snyder and the work by Maria Oyala that emphasizes the importance of social trust. And when they look at schools that are doing these activities with students, they find that they increase student school satisfaction and their pro-environmental behavior and their levels of hope compared to schools that are not green schools integrating these activities. And again, you can see those principles from the psychology of hope and the psychology of coping deliberately integrated into school activities with these very positive evaluation results. And I'm going to close here. Again, a couple of recent studies that have come out, both from Australia, and pointing out it's really hard for both educators and parents to know what to do and to do it, to make those spaces for those open conversations about kids' feelings, and to integrate these kinds of activities into the curriculum. And teachers are most likely to say it's hard because their school doesn't support these conversations, these activities. But both teachers and parents, that they feel sad and anxious themselves. And they're worried that if they open up these conversations, it could affect kids. And they don't know how to do it. They don't have the resources to do it. But when they were also asked, when has it happened? And you did open up a space for these kind of activities, these kinds of conversations, they reported really positive outcomes of children communicating what they want to see changed in their society, sharing really deep emotions, and then wanting to get out there and do personal and collective actions at home, in their school, and in their communities. So it is difficult, but it's worth it. And I'm going to stop my screen share right now. and open it up for questions and comments and ideas from you and all of you in the audience here.
Great, thank you. And if folks want to unmute and ask a question that way, that's great. Or feel free to type in the chat. We have one comment from Jose. I am reading Suzanne Simard's Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest.
Yes, yes. And I've read that book. It's very moving. And that's the kind of science that we want to be teaching and bringing into our classrooms, and bringing books like that home and sharing them with our kids. And even if they're not up to that reading level, we can still share the big ideas and kids can certainly assimilate it. I think that's a great example of showing what people are doing, like putting those kids together with the climate change scientists in our city in Boulder, for having these kinds of conversations about really exciting and hopeful work going on. And I'd love to hear from you too, if it's not a question, but things you've done that you felt really did help kids with coping, constructive hope.
Hi, Louise. My name's Elizabeth Schmitz. I'm in Washington State, and I'm a big fan of all of your work. So thanks for this session about this important topic. One thing we are doing here is using solutions-oriented storylines as a way to build a sense of cohesion from problem to solution, introduce ideas to kids, but then let them build and iterate on those ideas to be their problem solve in their own communities.
Yes, yes, and there are many ways to do that as a method, including film. There was a paper that also just came out this last year. Another doctoral student I'm working with here, well, she just graduated here in Boulder, but Kelsey Tain and others, we had a filmmaking project with teens where they told stories about climate change and actions that they could take, their families could take, people in the community were taking. And the drama also, Anna Leitonen and Panu Pikala in Finland had a recent paper, and that's also referenced in my slides, on using drama as a way to tell stories and how powerful that can be. So I think storytelling in every single form is a really important piece of this.
We have a comment in the chat. Using art to express feelings can be empowering. Greetings from Ireland. Thank you for staying up so late for this.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Using art is a wonderful way to open up those conversations about feelings.
Yes.
And
Roberta Burns. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm seeing this too.
Yes.
Suggestions for how educators can work on their own healing. Yes, that's a big piece of it, and that's where in the Australian, there's two surveys coming out from Australia this past year. Teachers and parents were saying, give us resources, give us guides for how to do this, including working with ourselves. I see a new book, Teaching Climate Change, and yes, and there are a number of resources in my article as well. But the nice book that was just referenced here. Also, I have two slides that I didn't show at the end of my talk, and I thought, well, I'm probably not going to have time for that, but it comes from a book by a therapist on how to deal with difficult climate emotions. And I was thinking I'll take them out because I didn't get to them from my PowerPoint, but now I'm thinking I'm going to leave them in because that's a great resource for anybody, anybody to use, including teachers, including parents, on kind of, and we're full of activities that you can do too on, how to help yourself work through this difficult world we're in. Yes, see, starting a conversation, the importance of that, making it a safe space for all the different perspectives to come in safely. And any positive experiences that any of you have had? We had some good suggestions here, storytelling, absolutely. But even just, even with your own children or children in your family, where you felt something shifted and, you know, there was both the recognition and the sense of possibility that happened.
I can share a little story if there isn't anyone else. I've been running the same program for many, many years in the summer, and we almost always do a pond dip and we almost always find a frog. And touching frogs is a really, for me, it's a really tricky one. We always wash our hands in the pond water so that we're not bringing the oils from our skin onto the frog. But I sometimes question whether that's like a good behavior to be allowing, but I also have seen kids that have never even really interacted with a wild animal, and the connection and spark that having that experience gives them. About the like 40th time that I did this, one little boy was so upset about us handling this frog, and it brought up a lot of emotions about all habitat loss and all amphibians that are struggling with pollution. And I'm going to get teary, but luckily we had a poster session right after that pond dip where we were going to make posters to share with the rest of the program, something that we were really passionate about. And so that gave him an outlet to share all of those feelings, and then everyone presented. And also, luckily, I don't have a very rigid schedule in that program, and I'm lucky that I can do that because I know a lot of programs have to be quite scheduled. But we had an opportunity to sit in circle and talk about that, and a lot of the boys that were insistent on holding the frog really started to understand the perspective of the boy that was so upset about that. And that peer of theirs who had those concerns, like that made a very big difference to those kids. So I think that was a special time for me to be that caring adult and to have a program that has flexibility to let conversations like that start, and then to like lead into artwork that can help them express their feelings and then, you know, present and speak. So that's a story I'll share.
Yeah. And I wonder if that shifted things for you as well.
Yeah, like about whether it is a good idea to catch frogs or just overall.
Both.
I still don't know if it's a good idea to catch frogs. One frog in the course of all of these didn't make it. One individual frog that I witnessed was actually, you know, not alive at the end of being handled. But most of these kids have not had any other experiences, and they talk about that, about the frogs that we catch so much. So I don't know. I would love to hear what other people think about those kinds of
And you know, I think it's good to open up those dilemmas with children, just as you did when you sat in the circle. And again, knowing that there are these different emotions out there and they're all accepted in the circle. And that's a very moral and ethical debate, and kids can have it. I mean, I hear even kids in kindergartens, for example, can have those kind of discussions about, you know, should we pick up the crawfish we find in the stream or leave it there? And those are really important teaching moments. I think very, you know, very important. I put in, I think let's see.
Yeah, we're just over time. We can say a couple more minutes. That's fine.
I put in also a book I wrote with a couple colleagues on the placemaking with children and youth participatory practices, because it's full of almost 100 different methods and variations for getting out there and doing project-based learning, but including a lot of art-based methods. That's actually the biggest chapter. And so again, and of course the arts do open up space for these conversations. Well, I think then we're at the end of our time. I thank all of you for coming and welcome this opportunity to share with you.